All right, so back to modeling part two. And part one, we created this pawn here, very simple. And let's actually rename this. So I'm going to double click here and I'm going to rename it pawn. And I'm actually going to move this to a new collection because once we start duplicating these to create our scene, I want to have it pretty organized. So I'm going to press M to get my collection options here. And let's go to new collection and let's do pawns. Let's press OK. And now we have our own collection here with our object. I actually want to move this to the side here because we're going to start modeling another piece. So I'm pressing G and X to move it in the X axis here to the side. And I'm going to make this non-selectable. So with that on, I cannot select it. That way I can just use it for reference there. And I'm not going to select it by mistake. And so I already have here a set of references for my pieces here. And looking at these, I already know sort of like, you can tell which ones are going to be probably most complicated to do. And it's probably going to be the bishop and the knight here. And so I want to sort of move up the ladder in terms of complexity of these objects. And so we already made a pawn, which is pretty simple. And I think the rook here, the knight and queen are, the king and queen are sort of like in the same level of complexity. So we're going to move right now in this episode to the rook here. And let's move this to the side. And a lot of the things that we need to model that we already sort of know. So we're just going to go through them a little bit faster. That way we can get that done. So let's start with the adding here. I'm pressing Shift A and then going to my cylinder here. Now, one thing that I want to do straight up is once I create it, as you know, I get my little window here with my settings for that object. And here you can make those changes because once you close this up, you won't get this back. So this is the time where you want to do this. But we're going to keep it very default and simple, just so we can keep the same settings throughout all the pieces. And so what I want to do is, if you notice here on the pawn, let's actually make it selectable. You're going to see that my origin is at the bottom here. And this is very useful for scaling and rotating and placing, snapping things into place using the base. Because by default, your origin is usually in the middle here of the mesh. And the way we can move this to the bottom here is I'm going to go to edit mode. And I'm going to select everything pressing A. And then I'm going to move everything in the Z axis up. So you can see the origin stays the same place in edit mode. So in order to snap it here, I'm going to press Control. Oops. Let's move this up. And I'm going to snap it there. All right. So now when I go back to object mode, if I rotate it, it's going to rotate around my origin, right? So I can rotate it here, or I can scale up from there. So it's a little bit easier for pieces like this that are going to be standing to have my origin at the bottom here. And same thing goes with like characters and stuff like that. So let's actually take a look at this. So let's actually start getting rid of these flat lines here. So shade smooth, and I go to my normals here, auto smooth. And then we have that done, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. And let's actually start modeling this. So if I use the pawn here, let's make that selectable, as my guide. I know these squares here in my grid, that's as wide as it gets here. I'm going to use this as a reference because I do want the rook to be slightly bigger than that. So let's scale that up just a little bit. And one thing I want to do first is sort of establish the main proportions of it. So I'm going to edit mode. Let's go to my vertices. I'm going to activate my X-ray. Select the top. And what I mean by establishing my proportions is I want to establish sort of like what's the highest point of these piece, what's the widest area and how wide that is, and you'll sort of like get the main proportions of it. And the other thing I can do is using my loop cut tool, Control R, I can sort of define the different areas of the piece. So if you go back to the reference here, let's take this one for example. I know that like I can sort of divide this in 3 parts. So I have the tower like top area, I have the main body, and then I have the base, right? So if I divide it, that's going to change depending on the design that I do. But what I like to do for stuff like this is sort of establish the limit for those areas. So I'm going to press Control R, and let's say this is going to be the area for the tower-like shape. And I can change this later, but I just want to get an idea. And let's establish the base. So let's do actually that right there. So now I have 3 parts: my base, main body, and tower-like top here. And now I can go into this area and actually start adding more details. So let's go to and I have X-ray on. So let's go to my polygons here, press E for extrude and S for scaling up. I'll make this tall, and let's scale this down just a little bit. Let's move that down. So I'm gonna start getting some details here. And most of the time I'm using Control R to get these options here, but we already covered that in the previous episode. So you're gonna see that I do this a lot at this point. Go back to my polygons. I'm gonna do the same thing to this one, but not so much. I can always go back to edit object mode and sort of get an idea of where that's going. Maybe I could bevel this edge. So double click to select all that loop. Control B for beveling. Maybe I want to have this sort of slanted design here. That's pretty cool. I actually want this not to be too prominent. So one thing I could do is, if I'm in polygons here, if I double click at the top here, you're gonna see that it selects the ring here all the way here. But if I double click on the side, it's gonna select my ring loop here. That's one way to easily select that without having to select each one. Let's go to my profile here. And let's go to my body real quick, and let's add one here. Let's actually scale this down. And let's do the same at the top here. Now the rook is sort of like a tower type like piece, so I don't want to have too many curves like here. So I want to sort of keep that in consideration for the actual design. I want it to actually feel like a tower. I'm gonna play with the proportions of these to make it look like that. Now it doesn't mean I cannot have curves, but I want to keep it very minimal. So for example, this one, it could be just a little bit curvy. But not sure if I like that. I actually like this better. And let's actually make the base a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna select all these vertices and bring them up, so it looks a little bit of a stronger piece than the pawn here. And let's scale these up just a little bit more. And let's bring these higher. So one thing I'm keeping in mind is that is the proportions of these little of these pieces, right? So if you look at the profile here, none of these are the same length. So for example, this one is it's probably the longer. Then I have a medium one, I have small ones, and I'm varying the sizes as I go through the profile here. So they're not the same. In that way, I get some variation in the design. So let's go to tower here. Go to my profile view here. And let's add some cuts here. And let's go to my polygons. Let's actually extrude these up just a little bit. Okay, so now what I want to do is sort of work a little bit the top area here and establish some of the design elements here. So what I'm going to do is go to edit mode, select this polygon, and I'm going to inset this to determine the thickness of this tower. So that is pretty good there. And I'm going to extrude this down just to get the inside part of it. There we go. See how low that gets. And what I'm going to do is actually let's do a cut here. In here. I'll show you why later in a second, but I actually want this to be thicker. So let's select this edge ring here and this one. And let's scale this down. So what happens here is, as you can see, this got lower. So one thing I could do is, if I go here, this new menu sort of helps you with transformations and moving and rotating and scaling things. But the second option here determines pretty much what you're going to use as a pivot for the transformation that you're going to use, right? So I'll give you an example here. So if I create a cube, let's create a sphere. Actually, let's duplicate this cube here. And let's get it here. So you can see the origin is right in the middle, right? And so by default, this is in bounding box center, which is the first one. So if I select all these three and I rotate, what it's doing is creating a box around all the objects selected. And it's using a pivot of that box in the middle of that box to make the rotation, right? Same thing for scaling and for moving. So that's what this one is. 3D cursor here is going to use a 3D cursor, which is this, as a pivot. So if I rotate now, you're going to see this, dotted line from the cursor. You can see that it's using that as a pivot here. Same thing for scaling, and for moving you won't notice it, but that's what it's doing. And the third one, and I use for the most part these three individual origins. So the third one is going to take in consideration each origin for each object. So now if I rotate, now it's using each individual origin. Same with scaling and moving. Right? So depending on what you want to do, you can go through these, and you can always move the origin. So if I want the origin, let's say in this corner here, I shift right click and I move the origin there. Now if I rotate and I select 3D cursor here, now I rotate through that. If I want it here, it's going to rotate through there, right? So depending on the situation, you are going to work with these. Now let's move the origin back to the cursor to the word origin. Let's delete these. And so that's what I'm doing with these edges here. If I have bounding box, it's gonna bring them sort of like in the center of it. But if I have individual origin, it's gonna take each loop here into consideration for its own transformation. So I want this to be maybe this thick. All right, that's good enough. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so now let's make sure we have a good base and body here before I move on to the top, because the most complicated part is going to be the top here, and I want to show you some of the tricks here. So what I want to do is actually bevel some of these edges here, and let's go to my edges, double click, let's just bevel just a little bit, just so we get some sort of edge there. So like so. I won't do all of them, but most of the ones that are needed for that. It's just a little bit just to get some sort of edging in there. So to this one. And this one, I can actually select these two. All right. So, so this area here, you know, we need to make the cuts to make it look sort of like a tower type thing. And there's a lot of ways you can tackle this. For example, I could just select the edges here and sort of delete them, right? And then fill up these areas. I'm not sure I want to do that yet because I have to do that for every single side, which is 4 sides. So what I'm going to do is let's actually separate this area from the main body for now, so we can actually deal with these separately. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to edit mode. I'm going to select all the pieces that I want to separate. I'm going to select all these. That is why I added that loop cut here. And I'm going to press P. And what P does is pretty much going to separate the selection from the main object and make it a separate object. So I'm going to click here, selection. Now I'm going to go back to edit mode or object mode. And now I have 2 pieces, right? And so let's actually select that. So let's go back here and select everything here. Yeah, so now we have that inside part selected. Let's press P, selection, and now we have 2 separate objects, right? So this is gonna get a little bit more intermediate because we're gonna dive into a modifier here, and we're gonna take a look at modifiers as we go. But I think this is a good way for to show you some good modifiers. And what I'm gonna do is I am actually going to hide this bottom part. So I'm gonna press H, and I'm stuck with this. And now let's look at it from the top. And what I want to do is I want to show you here the quadrants. So I'm looking from the top here, and I have this quadrant here. So if I take this axis here, cut in my space, I have 1 quadrant here, top right, top left, and the bottom here. And so since this is sort of like asymmetric piece, I can actually use some mirroring to save some time to just work on one area and then mirror that instead of get the same results, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select these polygon here and right click and go to poke faces. And what it does is it's sort of it cuts the polygon based on the mesh into 1 point in the center. So now what I can do is actually delete half of it. So I'm going to select half of it, then press X, faces. And I am actually going to delete half of the other half, like so. So I only have a quarter of it. I'm thinking of it as a pizza, right? So I have 4 slices, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm only gonna work on one because I'm gonna mirror that into the other sides, right? Let's go back to edit mode, and this is what I got, right? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go to my modifiers tab, which is this sort of wrench looking icon, and add modifier, and let's do a mirror. So now you see that I have this extra other part here because it's mirroring what I had. So if I go to edit mode, you're gonna see that I can only work on this area. And the cool thing is that whatever I do on this area, it's gonna do it to the other side, right? And so we have one side here. And what I'm gonna do is actually press this X here. So when you go to the mirror, it's using whatever axis to mirror. So now it's using the X axis, so it's mirroring it to the side, but I also want to mirror it to the Y axis. So if I press Y here, now I get my full piece here. And again, whatever I do here, it's gonna do it in all 4 corners. So so this is a good base for me to start working with, and I'm just gonna minimize that. I don't need it anymore for now because we already have that set up. Now you can always sort of like turn it on and off just to work on this piece, and then turn them back on and it will update. So let's actually do that. And what I'm gonna do is sort of add those indentations here to make it look like a tower. And so let's do a cut here, and let's do another cut here. I want to make sure that these are lined up like so. And I am going to select some of these polygons, which is the ones that I'm gonna actually delete to make that little space. So I think this should be good. Just keep in mind that this is gonna get mirrored to the other side. And I'm gonna press X and faces, so delete, right? So now I have these holes here. Let's take a look at what the mirror is doing here. So you can see I'm already starting to get some of the shapes here, but I'm getting these empty spaces here, which we're gonna fix. So let's turn that off. And what I'm gonna do is go to edit mode, and I'm gonna do my fill option. So this is a really cool way to do this. And if you go to edges, let's select the 2 edges that I wanna sort of bridge here, and I press F. It's gonna fill that up. Same thing here. So select these 2, F, and these 2, F, right? Let's do the same thing for this one, F, F, oops, and F. So now let's turn on my mirror, and boom. Now we got a pretty good shape here. And let's unhide the rest of the bodies to see how that looks. Alt H to unhide everything. And now we're getting somewhere here. So now what I want to do is actually, I don't want to get rid of the mirror yet because I still want to work this. And, you know, I could really go crazy here. For example, I could just select this polygon, maybe add some extrusions here just to add more details. See how that looks. Let's maybe bring this up. See how that looks. Shade smooth that. And let's actually add some beveling here, just so it's not so sharp. And let's take a look at, I think that's good enough for now. So let's do a little bevel here. All right. So this is pretty good. Let's see if we can play with these a little bit more. I do want to scale this. I feel like this could be a little bit bigger from the rest of the body. And so I want to try to scale this just a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is go to my edit. Now my origin is already there, so this is good. So if I press scale here, you're going to see that I'm getting this. And that is because I have individual origins here. So I'm going to use my 3D cursor. Let's scale that up, and now it gets a little bit bigger here. Let's move that down. Just want to line that up. So now I have these gap here because I scaled that up, and this is a bit of working with the mirror. You know, I don't have to worry about the whole thing. So I can grab these, and I'm actually gonna extrude them in. Not like that. Let's actually move the, I need the origin at the top here. So so sometimes the origin, you know, depending on what you're doing with the image, the origin is gonna be somewhere else. So if you right click set origin, you can set the origin to different areas, right? Geometry to origin, so it will move the actual geometry to the origin. We don't want that. And what we want is origin to geometry. We don't want that either, because what's happening is it's still adding the mirror effect, and it's bringing the origin into the middle of these instead of on the corner here. So so something that you can do is let's do cursor to selected. So what I'm doing is that I'm going to edit mode. I'm selecting my vertice here, and I want to have my cursor in that. So I'm pressing Shift S, cursor to selected, and then it's gonna bring it there. So now I can use my cursor as my pivot instead of my origin, right? Makes sense? And so now let's go to these here, and let's extrude these. And I want to make sure that here I have 3D cursor to use as pivot, as a pivot. Let's extrude these in, and now instead of they're going into the 3D cursor instead of the world origin here. All right, that's looking good. And let's actually move these down a little bit. Just want to line them up as best as possible because we're gonna merge them like we did the pawn here later. And let's actually do a little bevel here. All right, so that's looking good. Let's see. I feel like I want to have a little bit more space here. Let's take a look at the profile here. I think that was pretty good. All right, so let's actually merge these two. So we have still two objects here. But before I do that, I want to actually apply my mirror, right? Just so we can finalize that, but I want to make sure that everything I'm gonna do here is sort of final with the mirror, so I don't have to do it again. So a way to do that is if you go to the drop down here in the options, you can see apply or Control A. So you can just apply that, and then now it's apply. Now if I go to edit mode, I have the whole thing, right? So I don't have a modifier anymore. And now I can still do edits here. So for example, I could select all these and maybe extrude them further or in. Like so. So a little bit more detail there. But let's keep it real simple. So now what we want to do is sort of merge these two. We're going to do it the same way as we did the pawn here. So pretty much if I select them both and I go to edit mode, just want to make sure that they line up, and looks like they do. And so select them both, Control J to merge. You can see that now I have one object here. And now I can go to edit mode and grab all the vertices that I want to merge pretty much. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to, I could do it like this where I can select them, or I can try, let's do, actually select these and let's make these closer. So I'm moving them here just so I can match them more. Because the thing is, if I select them all, so if I go to vertices, select them all, and I do merge vertices by distance, a lot of these vertices that I did bevels are pretty close, so they will get merged as well, and that's something I don't want. So I want to make sure that they are literally on top of each other here. Now, if you're trying to work this close here, and you can see that I'm getting some clipping here. If I press N to bring my N menu here, I can work with my clip here. I want to reduce this so at 0.01 here. Let's actually make this pretty big here as well. But now I can get real close without getting any clipping. All right, so let's get to making these a little bit closer. There we go. So that looks better. So now I can go to my vertices, press A to select them all, right click, merge vertices by distance. And by the defaults, it's doing a lot of these. So I want to reduce the distance here. So I got 32 here. That means that my 32 sides are only 32 vertices are getting merged by that distance. So I think that's probably what I want. If there's more than that, I don't want that. My bevels look fine here and here. So let's keep it that way. All right. So now we have our rook. And let's actually rename these. So double click, rook. And let's put this in its own collection. Oops. Rooks. And here we go. So now we have a pawn and we have a rook. And let's make this selectable so we can move these. Let's move my war cursor to the origin here. And now we have two pieces.